Hello, sir. I think we have Dr. Suman Laudari with us. He is associated with University of Technology, Sydney. Without wasting much of your time, I would like to hand it over to him so that he can start his presentation. Thank you very much.
Uh, Hello, Susan, can you hear
Okay.
me?
Yeah, I can.
All right, that's good. Thank you, everyone. I'm sorry, I was left into the main room for a while, not knowing where to go. So I had to write to Udgam and Prakash to send me to the room where I'm supposed to be. I'm happy to have Amina ji here. She's my senior. She's also from UPS. Hello, Amina ji. And also, thank you, everyone. I see that we have around 18 participants in this room. So some housekeeping. If you can see my slide, please make sure your mic is mute. It's on mute. Raise hand if you'd like our attention. Keep your video on. We'd like to see who's around. If you have questions, ask them via chat. Susanji will collect all the questions and we'll discuss them during the Q&A because the session is very short. It's only 15 minutes. Otherwise, I would have loved to pause for questions in between. And the session is being recorded, as also informed by Udgam earlier. Right, so let's begin. Namaste and good morning to all, and maybe good evening to those who are from the UK and around Europe. Before I begin, let me thank you all for your time. I'm so many of you are here this morning to hear and to share experiences about online teaching and how it happens. So about me, I'm Suman Laudari, and I currently work at University of Technology, Sydney as an educational designer and a research fellow. I design resources and deliver training to guide and support academics in teaching with technology. Over the last 1 month, in particular, since the COVID situation, began, we've been I and our team, we've been providing pedagogical and technological support to academics to pivot to online teaching and learning because University of Technology Sydney focuses on blended learning, and it's spent a lot of resources on developing, building and classrooms and other resources for blended to support blended learning. So not all academics were ready to teach remotely. So just for your information, the shift from face-to-face to online happened within 10 days. Most of it happened within a week. And just for your information, right now, this semester, almost 2,000 subjects are being taught remotely. So drawing on these experiences today, instead of talking what the theory or what the book says, which you can pretty much learn on your own with some searches online, I'll share my experiences of teaching with technology and what I've learned over the past 5 years from my PhD research and as an educational designer and technology specialist at University of Technology, Sydney. So in today's presentation, we'll cover some of this. So I'll discuss some basics and then talk about what makes online teaching good and talk about summer in brief, just to provide you a framework for you to reflect if you teach online or if you're planning to support, teachers, or if you're planning to pivot to online teaching. So maybe summer can be very helpful because it's one of the frameworks that's been used widely in K-12 context, especially around the around Europe and USA and here in Australia. And couple things to consider before we break for Q&A. Right. So before I begin, could I ask you to answer the following questions, please? I'm sure you all have internet access. So I'd like you to go to menti.com. Use the code 421794 and answer these questions. The questions are already there in Menti. So I'd like you to answer these questions. And what I'll do is I'll also share the screen here while you are answering. And if you're having issues to access Menti, I would like you to respond via chat. Susanji will collect these, and I'll also monitor chat for now, and we'll probably briefly discuss your responses. But would love if you can go to Menti and answer this. Mm, I have it here. All right, so we have some answers. Online teaching means interactivity, future, connection, remote teaching, learning, adaptation, the future, good. We have 5 responses so far. We'll wait a few more minutes. We have some answers from, via chat, I suppose. Sorry, code is 421794. Thank you, Susanji. So 9 answers. We are here. Alternate modality. It's cool. Yes, it's cool. But yeah, we'll talk about that in a while. I think that's one of my talking points today. Um, yeah, opportunity, obviously, connecting with students, especially in this new reality. Um, Connecting remotely, yeah, very much agree with that. So preparation, yes, requires a lot of preparation. I think a lot of times online teaching requires more time than face-to-face teaching. um, Sharing. Right. So virtual learning, opportunity, connection, and challenging seem to be the main points here, talking points. Could I ask you to go to the next? I'll leave it here and go to the next question. So why is online teaching? Why is teaching online important? Could I ask you to go to next question and answer this? If you click next question on your Menti, you should be able to see this question. Right. Because of COVID, yes. Because students need to learn digital skills, because it is the need of the current society. 2 responses there, right? So, Menti looks cool. I mean, the way it interacts with live responses, because it is the need of the current society, because of COVID. Interestingly, only one, answer there, because the students need to learn the digital skills. I think, Susan, we'll stop it here and we'll get back to the presentation. Right. Thank you, everyone, for your responses. I have one more question, on Menti later in the presentation. Right. So I'll quickly discuss why online education and why using technology in teaching is important. And I'll draw on the current experiences. I suppose everyone can relate to it. Um, I mean, I think you don't disagree with me when I say that, because I'm like, online teaching or online education or teaching with technology is important because technology has not only infiltrated our society, but it's become part of our lives, I suppose. Imagine living in self-quarantine or in lockdown without any of the technology that you have access to. Imagine not being able to use technology despite having access and connections. Imagine not being able to do online shopping when the grocery store in your neighborhood is closed and you do not know how to find or order your groceries online. Or imagine that you are a student and your classes are being run online and you do not know how to attend your class because you do not know how to. So I think this gives us the practical reasons to combine technology into teaching and to be digitally literate. In fact, from pedagogical perspective, online delivery or online teaching can provide greater opportunities for students and teachers, especially if you have issues of disability, or if you have issues of remoteness, or if you are located in a geographical place where like commuting from where is challenging. So online teaching also provide great opportunities to those who may find it difficult to attend face-to-face classes due to various reasons, as I just mentioned. And teachers and students, can easily access and share current information with larger, more diverse group. And there are a lot of free resources, I suppose, in in online platforms. You could leverage them and allow students to learn from other experts in the field. And the students' learning experiences can be enhanced by providing greater opportunities for collaboration. So this gives us reasons to combine technology and leverage the online resources for teaching technologies. So with that brief note, I'll take you to some of the tips that I wanted to share today, and many of these, relate to what Professor Beal said earlier during his keynote. So, I could definitely make a list of ideas from the books and journals, but to make it more relatable to our personal experiences, I've decided to, share my observations and learning. Especially, I draw on my classroom teaching experience in Nepal, in the UK, and here in Australia, and my work experience here at University of Technology, Sydney. So, as you may have seen during this breakout session, I started with a housekeeping. So my first tip, is that you always start with your housekeeping, be it a face-to-face class or be it an online class, remote teaching. Establishing your expectations from your students is very, very important, so that your students know what to expect from your session and what you expect from them, and how you might expect them to behave in the class. For example, in the breakout session, we'd like you to be muted. So that's one of our expectations. So start with housekeeping, and I've always done this as a teacher. I see that Manasvi is here. I don't know if she remembers, but then when she was at S Institute of Management, um, you know every session when I went into the classroom, my first session used to be, this is what I expect you to do during the semester. My second tip is start with pedagogy. So I think this again relates to what was discussed during the keynote. Um, Online teaching is important, but it has to begin with pedagogy, not with technology, I suppose. This is important for several reasons, but I'll in particular discuss two. First, technology is rapidly changing. You come across different tools and different platforms, and surprisingly, you'll also realize that no technology offers a perfect solutions for your problems, and your technology's use strategies may not always work. So time spent on thinking about how you want to teach using this technology, a particular piece of technology, will be time well spent. So consider about which of your classroom teaching may work when you go online and which don't, and what new approaches and tools you might incorporate. The second reason to focus on pedagogy is that you may have access to several technologies, but if you're unsure when to use a given technology, or for that matter, the features in a technology, for example, in Zoom, when to use breakout rooms or when to use annotations, when to use whiteboard, then the feature, the technology alone cannot guarantee success. I mean, just using the Zoom cannot guarantee success. Earlier, when I asked those questions in Menti, a couple of people responded saying that technology is cool. Yes, it excites students. I completely agree that it excites students maybe in the first couple of sessions, but you cannot hold their motivation for too long if your teaching is poorly planned and you haven't thought through the activities that you're planning to do. So it's very, very important. I can't stress enough that you need to think through your activities, your pedagogical strategies, your classroom strategies, and always have backup plans. Things always don't work the way you wish them to. Professor Bill also talked about it. There are always times when you have technical glitches. So always have backup plans. For example, you might plan to use Zoom and it may not work. And this is very likely given the increase in the traffic in Zoom use. You know, and think about what happens if your tech fails, if your students are not able to come online for different reasons, such as access to internet, access to telephone, or access to smartphone or other required technology. As Bill said, say you start running your Zoom session and you realize that your mic is not working. So what do you do? So have a backup plan. and think, how do you cater to the, how do you function in different scenario if technology, if given technology fails. And most important, I suppose, is ask students to take ownership, regardless of whether you're teaching online, remotely, or face to face. It is a good strategy to encourage your students to take the ownership. For example, in courses which are theoretical in nature, or where you're planning to give lecture, surface the questions that the students may have around reading a lesson. Use discussion boards and forums. Maybe I know that not all institutions in Nepal have learning management systems, so you can probably use Edmodo. Edmodo is freely available. You can use Facebook private chats, you can use WhatsApp group, you can use Viber groups. I mean, what is more important is the pedagogy, not the technology. So use this technology to encourage students to interact and to contribute. Get students to talk in group outside the lecture. Tell them that they can talk, at their own time with their with their group members, and have them produce evidence of such engagement, maybe a document, and ask students to present. However, this does not mean that students do everything and you do nothing. You as a teacher, or all teachers, need to plan well and think through the activities, I suppose. And it is also good to ask students. I think this was also stressed by Professor Bill, to it is good to ask students how they might, or how or what they may like, what your students may like to do, or if there are things that they may want to do differently. Ask them to provide suggestions with reasons, and whether what they have suggested is feasible in the given circumstances. So that sort of provides opportunities for your students to voice their concerns and have an increased ownership of the activities and the class, I suppose. And again, I cannot stress enough that interactivity is important. It is very, very important to engage your students into interaction and activities, and get them to work collaboratively as much as possible. This is important for the reason of I think as soon as you move to online teaching, as soon as you move to remote teaching, especially at the time of social distancing and lockdown, students have less opportunities for peer interaction and social this collaboration. So when you ask them to discuss using the tools that you have access to, I think that enhances the social presence, the belongingness, and provides the students with opportunities for effective presence, expressing emotions through discussions, interacting, such as answering questions, and also cohesive presence. So which by which I mean promoting belongingness, promoting group commitment, and promoting again, I think interaction. So those are some of the tools, the first four, I suppose, very important ones. And I have some more. And these are, again, I'll discuss, each of them very briefly. If it's a lesson, which focuses on content delivery, my advice would be record your lecture and make your lecture, available to your students prior to the class, so that the students can listen to the lecture and come to the class. I mean, the online contact hours with questions that they have, and you can make most of that hours, discussing rather than delivering your lecture, because I think lecture is merely passing, what you have in your brain, your notes, to students' notes, without actually, having your brain to use. So I completely discourage, giving lecture in an online platform, because it's very easy to distract. Do not reinvent the wheel. If you don't have resources, and if you know that there are resources online, I wouldn't advise you to go and create all of these resources by yourself. For example, there are open education resources that you can access to. There are a lot of online courses. There are TED Talks in multiple different areas. There are videos on YouTube. There are, and also for school, I think Khan Academy provides a lot of tutorials and resources around teaching and learning in mathematics, science, and history and geography. So try to use those materials to supplement your content. Now, while students access these, you as teacher have a need to establish the context behind students accessing these resources. Why would they go and listen to TED Talk instead of hearing their teacher talk? Why? So establish that context and maybe design activities such as quiz or discussion board. You can use Google Form, Microsoft Form to create quizzes, and maybe use discussion forums, discussion board on Messenger if you don't have LMS, learning management system. And those sort of activities provide students the reason to engage with the resources that you have asked them to access. The other thing which is very, very important, I suppose, is equity and access. As we all have seen, the lockdown and measures of social distancing has already put a lot of families and individuals in financial distress. So it is important to consider the social and psychological impact, that the lack of access, failing to attend the class, failing to do the assessment due to reasons, associated with access to technology, access to internet, can have on students. I think this was also briefly mentioned by Professor Bill during his keynote. Ask with your students what issues they have, and how you can cater to their needs. So think about, when I said earlier, have plan B, C, D. So that's where your plan B, C, D come, and you provide that, equitable access to all the students. So that's another thing to consider. If you are thinking of teaching online to school students, it doesn't work the same way that it works with with adults. I mean, adults can make their own decisions. They can come online, do things, whereas school students, say studying in grade 3 or grade 2 or grade 1, won't be able to come online the way you want them to. So you'll have to think how that works. So think through questions such as who will support them? Are parents digitally literate to navigate through the digital space? Are your teachers ready to teach online? Do you have resources and materials to put online? Do the teachers have the required skills? If you're teaching four, 5, 6, 7 subjects, can you do 4, 5, 6, 7 subjects a day? Because teaching online or using Zoom can be more taxing, and the early research evidence have told us very clearly that using online platform, especially for remote teaching, is more tiring than being in a face-to-face classroom. So you need to consider all of those scenarios and issues for school students, I suppose. And assessment is the big deal. Let me share a brief, let me share an experience very briefly. We've now in our university and other universities in Australia, now we've moved to remote teaching, which is fine. It's working fine. Students are happy. The feedback that we've received is very, very positive. But there are some subjects, which still have this closed book, invigilated exams. So how do you do the exams? For example, in the case of Nepal, SEE exam has been postponed. Grade 11, 12 exams have been postponed. Bachelor's exam have been, the examinations for bachelor's level have been postponed. So how do we run those? Do we need the traditional exam? Can we restructure our exams? Can we instead design activities to address the learning goals or the learning outcomes, so that students work collaboratively and maybe engage in authentic assessment? So think about that. If I have no answer, I don't have direct answer. I can if you'd like me to give you ideas, I can talk to you separately about how you can structure your assessment on one-on-one basis. But when it comes to larger, or when we're talking in a conference like this, it's you as a teacher or school leaders, it's your responsibility to think how you may want to do your assessment differently, so that you don't the current situation does not impact what's happening. Right. So those are some of the tips or the pedagogical ideas that I wanted to share. Now I have one more question, which I would like you to answer again using menti.com. So the code is 747665, and the question is, how do you use technology effectively? Could I ask you to go to Menti and answer this, please? I'll try to open it. I have link here. Preparation, simulation, yes. We have two answers so far. Fallback plans, yes. Backup plans, we need backup plans. Um, what else? How do you teach? How do you use technology effectively? Maybe 30 more of, maybe one more minute. If you can't access, I'm not sure if I understood the question. So, I mean, what do you think is the effective, or what do you think are the strategies to use technology effectively, and maybe, for teaching and learning? I mean, student-centered contents, proper planning, training, learn to discover, adapt with effective communication, make it simple as much as possible, proper planning, yes. Learning first, experimenting, communicating well, yes, communication is very, very important. Prior interaction with students, making it simple, create opportunity, getting proper knowledge, capacity building for teachers and learners, suitable orientation. I think we'll stop it there, and I'll go back to the slide. I have a couple more slides. Um, Look, I wanted to avoid discussing theory, but then I think I feel that SAMA is a very, very useful framework. Obviously, there are other theoretical models which you could use, but then I feel that SAMA is a good model, and it's been adapted to school context across the world. So it tells us how you can use technology and what your technology use may suggest. The reason I asked you how you can use technology effectively relates to this question. The SAMA framework. So SAMA, if I were to tell you what SAMA is a framework, or you can call it SAMR. SAMA is a framework with a 4-level approach: substitution, augmentation, modification, and redesign. For using and evaluating technology in learning and teaching. So it's basically, it tells you how you should use technology, and and if you'd like to evaluate how your technology use is, maybe use the framework. I'll discuss what each of these mean. So substitution is basically, substituting teaching and learning activities through the use of technology without any functional change. For example, if you use your email to distribute reading resources, for example, an article, without any functional change in the assessment, or without any functional change in the in your teaching and learning, then that's substitution. So what technology has done is it's merely substituted your ways of doing things. So augmentation is, again, I'll use the same example. You may start distributing reading using email or learning management system, but you accompany it using with quizzes. You design quizzes and ask students to answer those quizzes online after reading the content that you sent. Or it could be creating a discussion board where you ask questions and students answer those questions after reading the resources that you've asked them to read. So that's augmentation. So what you've done is you've used technology to make some functional changes to your teaching and learning. Now, modification is, again, I'll use the same example. You've used a technology, you've asked students to answer quizzes. You've also asked students to, participate in discussion. Now, what modification does is, modification basically, it's going beyond that. So, for example, instead of you leading the discussion, you ask students to lead the discussion. So every week you have a new student who reads the report before any other students do, and they ask questions. So, okay, they may say, hello friends, I've read this, so these are some of the questions that I would like you to consider. So students take more ownership in the teaching and learning activities. Students are more active, I suppose, more interactive, and they are the ones who moderate. They are the ones who answer the questions that the fellow students might have. So that's about augmentation. And redesign is you redesign the teaching and learning activities which are inconceivable without technology. So, for example, I'll take an example of English language teaching. So what you do is, So okay, you may tell you that, or could be mathematics. Your students may tell you that, okay, I know how to speak English, I'm a very good speaker. So in that case, what you would do is, you'd probably loan a, recorder if you have, or you ask your students to use their mobile phone to go and interview people. Maybe if their parents speak English, or their teachers, if they're, in the school, their principal or their seniors. So what they do is they go and ask questions, maybe semi-structured, interviews sort of thing. So you tell your students, okay, these are some of the issues, these are some of the topics that I would like you to cover in the interview. So your students go and ask questions and interview successfully. And what they do is now they share that with other teachers. So you may invite your academic coordinator, you may invite your principal, or if you are academic teaching in higher education context, you may invite your other colleagues to assess the performance. So they can even video record it. So the assessment becomes more authentic. Students have a need to go and talk to people in a real life context. So and that cannot be done. Maybe that could be done, but then the sharing, the capturing of, or the recording of the interview is not possible without a technology. So that's what redefinition is. That's the end of my presentation. I could go and talk talking about SAMR, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions around SAMR during the Q&A. But before I end, I would like you to consider these. Maybe I could have listed other questions as well, but then consider online teaching versus remote teaching in the COVID time. What does SAMR mean to you? Do you think it's a useful tool, useful framework? Do you think you know or does your use of technology relate to substitution, augmentation, modification, or redesign? And how could you leverage the ideas that we discussed in this session or in the session earlier, keynote session, for your online teaching, and online teaching pedagogy? So I think Sujanji has collected some of your questions during throughout the session, and I'll also now open the chat, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Yes, sir. We've had one question so far, asked by Sunoz Das Shrestha. So he asks, what do you think we as educators can do to make online learning equitable and accessible?
I think it's a very good question. And I think Amina's answered, made some about equity and access during the presentations. As he said that in our context, this mode of teaching and learning will present new layers of exclusion and marginalization. I completely agree with that. Now, to answer your question, Sunozi, what can we do then? Maybe if you can record your lecture or record the content delivery sessions and make them available offline, or maybe ask your students to come with pen drive. If they don't have pen drive, maybe print it out. I don't know. I mean, I think every context is unique. I can't, tell for sure that access and equity is as same, I'm like, it is same in Kathmandu, or say the issues of access and equity are same in Kathmandu and Pokhara, Dhangari, and any other districts in far west. Where if you plan to use technology there, or issues of access is completely different from Kathmandu to Sydney, or Kathmandu to any other Western world. So I think you as an educator have need to think through it. So my only advice would be, if you're teaching remotely and you know that not all of your students have access, then you need to have alternative. You need to ensure that you have alternative. You ensure that your students can access those resources alternatively. So I think that's one point that I would like to make. If anyone in the audience would like to answer that question, you're more than welcome. Maybe Aminaji.
Amina, ma'am, would you like to answer, or are you unable to? Yeah.
Hello. All right. Okay. When Aminaji is online, we'll let her speak then. Oh, she's telling us that she's trying to speak, but then audible. We have another question: how can we blend online learning with face-to-face interaction, especially in Nepalese context? I think that's a very good question, Charamani ji. Look, Nepal's teaching and learning is still very, very traditional. Classroom teaching is based on my experience of teaching in different schools and in different level. Is still very traditional, teacher-driven, lecture-based. I think changes are happening. There are schools, which are trying to do things differently. There are academics who are trying to do things differently in higher education context. But blending online learning with face-to-face interaction requires some, I think, access to technology. There are issues of safety, online safety. There are issues of privacy. There are issues of I think the access and equity. So those are different things that you need to consider, I suppose. But I think if you'd like to blend, maybe Google Classroom is freely available now. Use your Google Classroom, develop your resources. If you're teaching in high school, think about the ways that you can digitize and automate some of your content, and maybe deliver your lecture, record your lecture online if you have time. Ask your students to listen to those coming prior to they come to the classroom. Make your classroom time for discussion, I suppose, and for collaborative activities. Biraj, yeah, I think what changes are necessary in teaching and learning methods. I think I would like you to basically clarify your question. Sujanji, can we unmute him, please? Biraj Gimire.
Yes, sir, I can.
Sorry for the back.
Virat, sir, please go on.
So much for unmuting me. My question to the resource person is there any sort of teaching in terms of the methodology that you can suggest or recommend?
Look, I think in terms of pedagogy and classroom teaching, say, ideas, there are tons of resources. We could probably discuss about them separately, Garaji. But then my suggestion would be look for tips. Do some online maybe searches. Read around teaching online. Read around teaching. How to teach blended learning effectively. And also those are some of the things, I suppose. And especially if you can find if you can Google resources around summer and its application in classroom in K-12, I think that would give you a lot of ideas around teaching and learning with technology, I suppose.
Thank you.
We just got notified that the breakout room will end in less than a minute. But I think we have
less than a minute. So can we probably answer one more question? So how can we mentally prepare students for online interaction? I think it all depends on how well. I think it's you need to communicate about it. Discuss about this with students. Ask your students to take more ownership. Ask for the ideas. Ask them what they feel about using technology. And I think that while that provides them opportunities to voice their concerns, that also tells them that also sort of gives them a sense that they were their advice was sought for, and